Welcome back to Weeknight Mysteries podcast. My name is Yuras. I'm joined by my co-host, as always. How are you doing today, Rain?
Feeling a bit hot today. How are you?
Yeah, same here. I mean, it's a really hot day in Lithuania, Eastern Europe. We are experiencing some sort of a heat wave, but we're fighting it off. This is the last day.
Finally.
Yeah, finally. Should be the last day of the summer. I wanted to kind of record really quickly because I have been looking into this New Orleans serial killer case for the last couple of days. It's a very fascinating case and seems like it's not being talked a lot about. And even on YouTube, if you search New Orleans serial killer, they will. I think there are some other kind of killing sprees that happened later on, like in the early 2000s. But the one that I want to be kind of discussing here today, or just talking about, is the one that happened in the early 90s. So we have a total of 28 victims that have been murdered, and one was a survivor. And all of these kind of attacks happened between 1991 and 1995. So we have 4 years time frame that we're working with here. Most of the victims are black prostitutes from the more impoverished areas of New Orleans. So we're not talking about the French Quarter.
Yeah.
We're talking about the more impoverished areas of New Orleans.
Is it close to the French Quarter?
It's very close.
Oh.
It's literally a stone throw away from the French Quarter. It's very close. But things get really kind of depressed outside of that French Quarter really quickly. Because I looked at the street view. It's not a nice sight out there. So yeah, I guess the plan here is to kind of go over my notes and talk a little bit about the things that happened there, because it is very fascinating. Let's start with 1991 and where this whole story began. According to investigators, the crime spree began in the summer of 1991 after a young black woman informed police about an attempt on her life. According to her testimony, on July 22nd of 1991 in the summer, she decided to visit a friend. She left her house and walked up Merrill Street. As she was walking, she noticed that a car was following her. The driver pulled up to her and asked her if she wanted a ride. She declined, saying that she was just going to walk a few blocks from here. The man persisted and continued following her in his vehicle next to this woman. He continued to insist on giving her a ride. Then he stopped and got out of his car and pulled up beside her. Despite her protests, he put her in his vehicle, somehow was able to subdue her, and drove a half a mile past her friend's house where she was initially going. After he stopped the car, he got on top of her and began to choke her. She realized that this man was trying to kill her. She tried to fight him off, but she did not have enough strength, so she was unsuccessful. He proceeded to strangle her with his bare hands, stripped off her clothes, and dumped her by the side of the road. Her name was never disclosed, but she is referred to as Brenda in the case files. So she's the only survivor that we know of. So basically she was choked unconscious, and the killer assumed that she was dead. But she woke up all dizzy, and then she kind of reported this to the police later on. During the testimony, Brenda, well, her name is not Brenda, but we refer to her as Brenda because that's how she is referred to in the case file. She gave a description of her attacker, and also from this description, an identikit was created. It's basically a sketch, a sketch of the suspect. So it's a muscular, well-dressed, middle-aged black man who drove a dark-colored vehicle, possibly Buick Regal or Chevrolet Monte Carlo. And we have a sketch of this guy. I included it in the notes. We have actually a couple of sketches, and later on we are going to be talking about one of the suspects who actually matches the sketch incredibly close. And I feel like it's definitely, I have a hint that one of the people that we're going to be talking about is definitely to some extent involved in these crimes. Now let's move on to the next victim. Let's jump to August 4th, 1991. So next month, actually just a couple of weeks later. The body of a 17-year-old Danielle Britton was found in a ditch not far from where Brenda had been abducted from. Her body had been covered with garbage. An autopsy determined that she had been beaten and strangled. Britton had dropped out of school shortly before her death and was last seen in a New Orleans bar next to an unknown man. It's unclear whether she was employed or not, but nothing indicated that she engaged in prostitution or use of drugs. We have a picture of Danielle Britton. Following Danielle's murder in September, so following basically the next month, September 3rd, the body of a 21-year-old Tyra Tassin was found, who was a mother of 3 children. She had a criminal record and drug possession. On the same month, actually 20 days later, on September 22nd, the body of a 28-year-old Charlene Price was found in Behrman Park, just 1 mile from where Britton was found. The victim that was the second victim, the 17-year-old girl who was found dead. An autopsy determined that she had been beaten and strangled. Price had a history of drug abuse, but it is unknown if she was a prostitute. We have an image of her as well. On November 21st, so a couple of months later, the body of a 37-year-old Regina Oko was discovered. She was a mother of 3 children. She had multiple arrests for prostitution during her lifetime. An autopsy deducted that she had been strangled and prior to her death had been taking a large dose of cocaine, which could have caused an overdose. The next month, on December 14th, a skeleton remains were found in a ditch near a highway. The autopsy established the remains belonged to a young black girl who at the time was in her early 20s and approximately 157 centimeters tall. Despite having a defining characteristic, namely strongly protruding front teeth, she was not identified ever. This victim is referred to as Jane Doe number 1, and she was presumably strangled and found not far from Britton's body. So all of these crimes, at least the ones that happened in 1991, are happening in the same kind of general vicinity. Everything is happening in the Algiers, let's call it neighborhood of New Orleans. It's on the other side of the Mississippi River from the French Quarter. But it's right there, it's pretty close. And this is where most of the murders happened, at least in 1991. And this is a fairly impoverished area. I was able to look into a little bit on the Google Street View from like the later years, because there was no street view of how the place looked in 1991, but the place looks pretty depressing. It's not a pretty sight at all. Now let's jump to the following year of 1992. We have 4 bodies found in total this year. So on January 4th, the body of a 29-year-old Lydia Madison was found, who had several arrests on charges of prostitution and drug possession. She was found in a ditch under a highway overpass. The cause of her death was also declared as strangulation. So at this point, police also learned that 3 other bodies had been found in a nearby jurisdiction, not in New Orleans but nearby, which borders New Orleans, bringing the total number of victims at that point to 8, leading detectives to believe that the same killer may be responsible for all 8 victims. 7 of the 8 women were found within a 3-mile radius, so very nearby each other. All but one of the west bank of the Mississippi River, so only one of them was on the east bank. The killer has struck once a month at that point, always strangling his victims, always leaving them nude, face down, in or near illegal dumps. All of the victims were poor black women from New Orleans with slim to medium builds. On June 2nd of 1992, a 25-year-old George Williams' body was found in the LaBranche wetlands area of St. Charles Parish. An autopsy determined that she had been strangled. Investigators determined that she was a transgender woman and had worked as an exotic dancer at a New Orleans nightclub. George Williams had prior arrest for robbery and drug possession. In July 25th of the same year, the body of a 33-year-old Noah Filson was found in the waters of a canal near the I-55. Like Williams, Filson was a transgender as well and worked at a nightclub under the name Brenda Bewitch. In September 21st of that same year, the remains of a 29-year-old Regita Martin were discovered in the waters of another canal near the highway. She was an impoverished mother of 3 children who engaged in prostitution and had several previous arrests. And that concluded 1992. Let's talk a little bit about 1993. 2 bodies in total were found, but a lot more murders had taken place, just that those murders were discovered in 1994. But let's start off with February 20th, when the skeletal remains of a 30-year-old Cheryl Lewis was discovered in the waters of a canal near Hackwell. Lewis was an impoverished mother of 4 and also was a known prostitute with several arrests and had been strangled to death. However, while investigating her death, authorities learned that she was last seen alive on February 2nd, getting into the car of an unidentified white male. And we have this white male coming up later on. He is one of the main suspects in these killings. In February 21st, the following day, the body of 42-year-old Dolores Mack was also found in the water of a canal near a highway, not far from where Cheryl Lewis was found. She too had been strangled, but had no known history with either drugs or prostitution. So within the span of 2 days, 2 bodies were discovered. During this period, according to investigators, the killers committed several other murders, but due to various circumstances, the bodies of the victims were found only in the following year, 1994. In total, in 1994, there were 8 bodies found. The first body was found in February 5th, and skeletal remains were found in the St. John Baptist Parish, later determined to be a young woman between the ages of 25 and 35. She had been strangled. She is unidentified and is currently referred to as Jane Doe number 2. On February 10th, 5 days later, more skeletal remains were found, this time to a girl whose age is estimated to be around 15 to 17. Due to extreme decomposition, she too remains unidentified and is named Jane Doe number 3. So I reckon that these murders happened in 1993 and the bodies haven't been found for a very long time. That's why, due to decomposition, they were never identified.
But geez, how many Jane Does are there?
I think in total there was, 5 or 6 Jane Does connected to this murder spree. Due to decomposition, they can't identify them. And it's also pretty bizarre how I guess the loved ones of the missing don't report them missing, because I do assume that everyone here is from the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
On February 13th, 25-year-old Stephanie Murray's body was found in a small pond near the Bonnet Kara Spillway. And then 2 days later, on February 15, the skeletal remains of another young girl were found, whose identity was never also identified. So seems to me like in February of 1994, there was maybe a tip-off that a certain location has a lot of potential dead bodies, and that's why police started looking into it. On April 2nd of that same year, 2 sets of skeletal remains were found in the canals, later determined to be of a young woman and a young man. Due to the extreme decomposition, neither could be identified, and they are also referred to as Jane Doe number 5 and John Doe number 1. July 3rd, the body of a 32-year-old Michelle Foster, who had gone missing in New Orleans just days prior, was found. On October 19th of that same year, the skeletal remains of a woman were found in a wooded area near a highway within the limits of Bridge City. She was later identified as the 28-year-old Stephanie Brown, who had no prior criminal record. And lastly, in 1995, a total of 7 bodies were found. In January 22nd, the body of a 29-year-old Amanda Ford, an impoverished mother of 3 children, was found in a swamp near the I-55. During her lifetime, she had been arrested multiple times for theft and had a history of drug abuse. On January 23rd, the following day, the body of a 39-year-old Sandra Warner was found in St. John the Baptist Parish. 2 days later, on January 25th, the remains of a 25-year-old Henry Calvin, who had gone missing months earlier from New Orleans, were found. On March 24th, police found more skeletal remains under an overpass in the general vicinity. While the remains were determined to be female, authorities were unable to identify the victim, and she is listed as Jane Doe number 6. Her estimated age was between 25 and 35. In April 30th of that year, the bodies of 2 women were found in a swampy area near I-55. The victims were later identified as Karen Ivester and Sharon Robinson. Sharon was 28 and Karen was 30, respectively. Authorities determined that Ivester had been strangled while Robinson had been beaten and strangled, but the presence of water in her lungs indicated that the cause of death had been drowning. And we actually have some images of these crime scenes. One where we see where Karen Ivester's body was found, and another image of the location where Sharon Robinson was found. In May 6th of that year, the body of a 39-year-old Sandra Williams, who had been strangled, was found on a boulevard in New Orleans. According to the official investigation, the murders ceased following Sandra's death. That's when it all stopped. But in 1996, one other body was found that was murdered prior to that. It was 39-year-old Lola Porter, who had gone missing from New Orleans in 1992. Police later interviewed her friends and acquaintances, who stated that she had been cohabiting with a white male who vanished shortly after Porter went missing. So, this is the extent of the murder spree in New Orleans. I was a little fascinated that there was not a whole lot of talk about this. Another thing worth mentioning, New Orleans back in the early 90s had a very bad police problem because the police was very corrupt. It was known to everyone in New Orleans that a big portion of the police officers are actually extorting pimps for money. So they were providing protection to pimps. Pimps were pimping out the girls, and they had to pay protection money to law enforcement so they wouldn't get booked. And some police officers actually engaged in pimp work themselves. So there was a lot of corruption back in the day, and I think it was like everyone knew that it wasn't a great police kind of situation back in the day. So that's the general kind of scene that we also have to account for when we talk about this particular killing spree. Still pretty strange that it's not that widely publicized. I mean, we have a Wikipedia page, and it has been talked about in 1992 in Unsolved Mysteries. I actually took a look. Unsolved Mysteries did an episode on this. But that's it. That's pretty much the extent of the reporting. Nothing really came about of it. During the investigation, in a press conference in August of 1995, law enforcement announced to the media that they had the prime suspect for all of these murders, and that suspect was 33-year-old Victor Gantt, a police officer working in New Orleans. So, as I've mentioned before, one of the corrupt cops. During the investigation, it was established that Victor Gantt had an intimate relationship with one of the victims, Sharon Robinson, the 28-year-old woman who was found murdered previously. It was established that Sharon Robinson, whose body was found 3 months earlier, prior to this press conference on April 30th, alongside Karen Ivesters. Remember that moment when 2 victims were found within 2 days, and we've seen pictures of their locations where they were found. As a young man, Victor Gantt was a boxer and regularly went to the gym and did weightlifting, and that's why he closely matched the 1991 suspect sketch based on Brenda's testimony. Remember the very first victim who survived? Her kind of description of the killer was kind of made into a sketch, and Victor Gantt closely matched it. Now we have this right here. Your take on this?
This is him. We have the guy.
Yeah,
Case closed.
This is literally him.
Yeah.
Everything. The eyes, I think, are the most.
Even the eyebrows. Look at
Telling.
the eyebrows. Look at the left eyebrows. It's a little arched. It's just completely the same as the sketch.
Yeah, it's identical. It's almost like the guy who drew the sketch almost had a portrait of Victor Gantt, and just was drawing a drawing of Victor Gantt.
Well, the sketch has hair though.
But not all of them.
That's
As you
true.
can see, the sketches below that one, the other 2 ones, one has a receding hairline, because Victor Gantt is bald in this image that we see right now. But yeah. And some more information about Victor Gantt, or some pictures. I was able to find this picture where a police officer is holding Victor Gantt's case file. So you can see that there's a bunch of documents there on Victor Gantt. And also we have some more images of Victor Gantt when he was still serving as a patrol officer. He was one of the corrupt cops back in the early 90s, and looks like he could be involved in many of these murders, especially
He's literally the same guy in the sketch.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Jeez.
Victor Gantt was a native of New Orleans. He spent his childhood and youth in the Algiers neighborhood where most of the murders happened. He became a police officer in February of 1980, and while on patrol, Victor would spend a lot of time in the red light district, where in the later years he acquired many acquaintances among pimps, prostitutes, and street informants. In the early 90s, Gantt gained a reputation for being a corrupt police officer after a number of informants reported that he, along with a few others, were running racketeering operations against pimps and other criminals. It was revealed that during this time he met Sharon Robinson, who soon became his girlfriend/roommate. On December 9th, in 1994, Sharon Robinson went to the police to report him for beating her up, and according to her statement, Victor punched her in the face and broke her nose. Victor denied the accusation. He stated that he had pushed her during an argument, with Robinson then hitting her nose on a chair. This was contradicted by her children, who said that they had witnessed Victor beating Sharon up. This was backed up by the emergency room doctor who testified that the woman's injuries were the result of a beating, not of her falling down and hitting her face on the chair. Sharon Robinson's body was found 3 months after she came to police because in early 1995, a disciplinary panel and the hearing to determine Victor's punishment began. During the hearing, members of the disciplinary committee reviewed the testimony of the prosecution's witnesses. The key witness was supposed to be Sharon Robinson herself, because she was the victim, but she was found dead on April 30th. According to investigators, Gantt had killed both Sharon and her friend Karen Ivester in order to get rid of them and kind of protect his gig and freedom, allegedly. According to friends and acquaintances of the victims, Victor Gantt had a personal grudge against Karen Ivester and had spoken negatively about her on multiple occasions. In order to determine whether he was guilty or not, Victor Gantt was ordered to submit DNA for testing to see whether they could match it to the perpetrator's saliva, which was recovered from a piece of chewing tobacco found near Karen's body. And just FYI, Victor Gantt also liked to chew tobacco. So what a coincidence.
There we go.
The results were inconclusive, and no charges were filed against Victor, who was dismissed from the force in August of the following year. And up to this day, the only information about him that I have is that he moved to Atlanta, and I think he's still alive, and he's just a resident in Atlanta. So Victor Gantt, a guy who I personally, from reading this information, I heavily suspect that he was the murderer. He's just walking around Atlanta. He's probably an old guy by now, but still pretty weird when you think about it.
Do you think he pulled some strings with the DNA testing?
It's hard to say. Back in the early 90s in the New Orleans police force, I feel like this is not out of the question.
Yeah, so he could easily get away from it.
Not easily, but I think he could try to leverage his position a little bit. Now let's jump to another suspect in the case, because remember, for this killing spree we have two suspects.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is a man named Russell Ellwood, another resident of New Orleans. He soon came under police suspicion. Also, Russell moved to New Orleans from Ohio in 1968, way back in the day, even before the killings. But for the next 30 years, he lived in squalor because of his drug addiction. He had no permanent residence, he never married, and he changed professions very often, mostly sticking to photography and cab driving. Due to his drug addiction, Ellwood was arrested several times from 1968 to 1998. When not imprisoned, he spent most of his time along fellow vagrants back in New Orleans. Russell Ellwood first came under police scrutiny in 1994, so during, I would say, the height of the killing spree. He was allegedly found masturbating in his car by police, which had been parked by the road near where Cheryl Lewis and Delore Mack's bodies were found. Remember, this is another set of murders that have been uncovered within a day of each other. And he was found masturbating there in the middle of the night in these
Inside
locations.
his car.
Yeah, and he was partially undressed. He was forced out of his car by law enforcement, and law enforcement officers asked Russell to show his driver's license. He then explained that he stopped there in the middle of the night in that very convenient location where the murders had, where the bodies had been discovered, in order to change the oil and repair the brake pads of his car. And he willingly allowed his vehicle to be searched by law enforcement. Now, officers found none of the items required for the fixes, not even a flashlight, which would be necessary to perform such repairs in an unlit area at night. And he was masturbating, so he wasn't really trying to repair anything right there.
Yeah, okay, but based on the sketch, he looks nothing like it.
No, that's the thing. Since he's white, we know for a fact he's not responsible for all the murders. Because the first person who, or at least we suspect, let's put it this way, because the first victim who survived clearly said that the man was black. But this is a white man that we're talking about,
So he was probably just minding his own business in the middle of the night. Police showed up, got caught doing the act.
No. We will uncover soon that he has a very sinister past.
Oh, jeez, okay.
Russell Ellwood was questioned regarding the murders and later was booked as a suspect. Now, when I said that he does have a past, I mean that there was 28 murders in total, so it's likely that more than one person was
that's true.
was involved. Sometime later, Ellwood moved to Florida, and in 1997, when the killings have already stopped, because they stopped in 1995, so 2 years after the killings had already stopped, law enforcement questioned him about the murders again because he seemed very suspicious at that time. Ellwood was informed of his rights, and within 3 days he gave several statements recorded on tape. During the interrogations, he admitted to frequenting black prostitutes throughout his life, claiming that he knew more than 100 girls, in addition to frequently taking drugs such as heroin, crack cocaine, and LSD over the years. The investigators became increasingly suspicious when Russell Ellwood started speaking about having a dream in which he was being questioned about a series of murders, and later admitting to frequenting the locations where the bodies were found, but still continuing to reaffirm his innocence within the dream. So this is the dream. He was having dreams. He told law enforcement he was having dreams about getting questioned about murders, but saying that he was still innocent in those dreams. So this is it's very weird.
Yeah, it's really weird.
On August 4th of 1997, just days after the interrogations were completed, Ellwood was arrested for buying cocaine from an undercover police officer at his home in Florida. And as a result, he was convicted and sentenced to spend 85 days in the county jail. According to his cellmates, Russell Ellwood implicated himself in the prostitute killings back in New Orleans and its various suburbs. One of them, Stan Hill, who was also a cellmate, contacted the county prosecutor's office and claimed that Russell Ellwood told him and described to him in detail how he had driven the women to outlying areas of the city, offering them large quantities of drugs that caused overdoses, then strangled and dumped their bodies. A number of other inmates witnessed a fight between Russell Ellwood and another inmate, during which he allegedly said, "Yeah, I killed that bitch, and I'll kill you too." It's okay, I think we can say this word.
The B word.
The B word, yeah.
Okay.
We have to say it. Another inmate, Stephen Michael Busser, also told police that Ellwood had boasted of being wanted for more than 60 murders within the state of Louisiana. New Orleans is in Louisiana. And had even described to him in detail one of the murders. And this was the biggest kind of eye-opener for me, and this kind of very strange and bizarre detail. When a man, and I know I'm kind of jumping to a different topic here, but this is going to be strange because a man named Clay,
Who is this guy?
I don't know, called in to a Howard Stern's show in August 13th, 1997. So this is just days after Russell had been booked on buying that cocaine from an undercover police guy. Literally 9 days later, after he was booked, a man who, said that his name is Clay, called in the Howard Stern show. And now, this man, during the conversation with Howard Stern, which was broadcasted live, described the details for more than 12 murders and gave some detail about his background, indicating that he was a white resident of New Orleans. Russell Ellwood was arrested on August 4th for purchasing cocaine from an undercover officer 9 days earlier. And he was sentenced to jail for 85 days and was incarcerated on August 11. So it's kind of unclear if he was...
So it wasn't him?
No, we don't know. I guess we don't know. Because I don't know how he would have made that call and how they wouldn't have tracked him. But it seems like Russell was incarcerated on August 11, and that mysterious guy who called Howard Stern, who really seemed like he was really a serial killer. Because back in the day, a lot of fake killers would call in. And it was pretty clear that these are just pranksters. But this one guy in 97 literally seemed like he was the guy. He was a real killer. He wasn't playing around. Like the way he spoke, and you can find this on YouTube. It has millions of views. The original video has like 17 million views. It's a huge video. It's a huge thing. And FBI people actually came in the next day to the studio and took the audio and started investigating. But law enforcement never really released any more information, as far as I'm aware, about this caller. But it's strange, and potentially Russell could have called 2 days later after being incarcerated somehow. I don't know, maybe from the prison or something like that, to Howard Stern and just, I don't know. It's pretty bizarre. I mean, maybe we could match the voice somehow, and I'm pretty sure law enforcement probably had many hours of trying to see if this was the same guy, and you know what I mean. We don't really have, as far as I know, a audio of Russell Ellwood. So we don't know how he sounds, because obviously if we did, we could compare, obviously, but I don't think there's anything like that available for us online, so we can just guess. But the guy who called in did, for me, when I looked at Russell Ellwood's picture and I listened to the audio, I couldn't see that voice would come out from Russell Ellwood. The caller seemed a lot younger. Russell Ellwood, but then again, I'm not really sure what year is this Russell Ellwood's picture from. So and anything could be the case in this kind of thing. So basically, okay, so at this point, after he got released, because he was only there for 85 days, Ellwood returned to Canton, Ohio, to live with his brother, who actually offered him a high-paying job. He was once again questioned by law enforcement during the interrogation. Russell Ellwood initially denied making any such statements to the inmates, but after an audio tape of Stan Hill's testimony, and remember, Stan Hill is his cellmate who called the prosecutor's office and told, this guy, Russell Ellwood, is confessing to all these murders. So after, Russell listened to the recorded confession of Stan Hill, who was, essentially kind of telling on him, he did confess that he boasted about this, about being a killer. But then he said that mental illness had caused him to boast. He also, not on tape, confessed to Ron Camden, a 27-year veteran of the homicide unit, that he had killed a black girl whose corpse he had dumped in a canal. No recording of this confession was taken, and Ellwood later denied ever confessing to such murder to Mr. Ron Camden, the police officer.
Of course, he won't admit that.
Yeah. Now, let's jump to what happened next, right? So Ellwood, once again, claimed that he had a mental illness and that he needed help, and that he demanded that he would be allowed to return to New Orleans to see his attorney and be provided with treatment. The request was denied, whereupon Ellwood confessed to killing Lewis and Mac. The women that we talked about earlier, the same two women that he was found kind of masturbating in the location where their bodies were discovered. He kind of, what seems to me, abruptly kind of confessed, but then he refused to be audio taped, to say it on audio tape, and then soon started denying this confession again. Eventually, Russell Ellwood was released again, and in January 1998, he returned to New Orleans. But on January 16, shortly after returning, he was stopped by traffic cops for speeding and was scheduled to appear in court, but failed to appear on a timely manner and was subsequently arrested for contempt of court. Ellwood was eventually convinced and ordered to spend 120 days behind bars. While incarcerated, authorities charged him with the murders of Lewis and Mac on March 4th. During his trial, a number of Ellwood's former cellmates and prostitutes testified as prosecution witnesses. One of them was Deanne Gilliam, a former prostitute, told the court that she had known Ellwood since the early 1990s and had dated him periodically. She testified that in 1992, during a date, Ellwood, while under the influence of drugs, assaulted, beat, and strangled her into unconsciousness.
Oh, jeez.
Gillian stated that she woke up to find herself in a pool of blood in an unfamiliar wooded area, where a passing motorist found her by chance and sheltered her at the motel that he was staying at. She said that she did not report the incident due to being a prostitute with a criminal record. Another former stripper, Navasa Richmond, in turn testified that she had also been beaten and assaulted twice by a drug-crazed Russell Ellwood, during which he also attempted to strangle her. Janie Stokes, a former prostitute, told the court that she first met with Russell in 1992 or 1993 at the Snell's gas station in Morero, when he was working as a cab driver. Jenny stated that Russell bought her lunch and treated her nicely before driving her to his home, where he suggested that they use cocaine. After doing drugs together, Ellwood beat her, but Jenny managed to escape. And Antoinette Rainey, who worked as a drug dealer in New Orleans, also appeared as a witness for the prosecution, testifying that Russell Ellwood was a regular customer of hers. She recounted an incident in which Russell forced her into his car at gunpoint, then drove her to an underpass where he beat, raped, and threatened to kill her during the whole ordeal. However, Antoinette was able to escape. She did not report any of this to law enforcement due to her criminal lifestyle. 3 other witnesses testified that they had seen Ellwood with Cheryl Lewis shortly before her disappearance. According to the testimony of Denise Sanders, who was Lewis's best friend, she had seen her with Russell Ellwood 3 days prior, who was out driving his cab at that time. Now, Sanders also admitted to withholding this information because she was a drug dealer. The second witness, Antoinette Holmes, who lived near Lewis, testified to seeing her at the Time Saver restaurant in Bridge City 2 weeks prior. 2 weeks prior to her being reported missing. She was standing between 2 parked cars and talking to a cab driver, and she later identified Ellwood as the cab driver. And lastly, Wavereen Henry, Lewis's cousin, stated that she last saw her at a hotel in Avondale with a man whom she identified as Russell Ellwood. According to her, Lewis told her that she and Russell were on their way to a suburb of New Orleans. Later on in that same suburb, she was found dead. So Russell himself denied knowing any of the victims or committing any murders, of course, although he could not provide an alibi. Cheryl Lewis's mother, Cheryl Lewis, the victim, in turn admitted that her daughter was a drug addict. She knew that she was a drug addict and a prostitute, but she said that she had never seen Russell Ellwood with her daughter before. So the mother kind of, didn't immediately, jump on the train of accusing Russell.
Mm-hmm.
Russell's attorney argued that Russell was not in New Orleans at the time of Cheryl Lewis's murder, claiming that he had been in Ohio with some relatives. Russell was known for keeping extensive amounts of documents that indicated his whereabouts, but the receipts regarding his supposed presence in Ohio for February 1993, when Cheryl Lewis was murdered, had mysteriously disappeared.
Of course.
But this was pretty strange to me because Ellwood's attorney then filed a motion for a polygraph test to be performed on a woman named Sue Rushing. Now, Sue Rushing was the head of the task force, and the court granted this motion. So during the polygraph test, this same task force head, Sue Rushing, was unable to answer a series of questions regarding the missing receipts, but their results were inconclusive. So this casted doubt on Ellwood's guilt. So it seems like the task force was potentially corrupt also, because those receipts were potentially destroyed by the head of the task force. That's what I'm hearing. But this is kind of going both ways now. So who really is the culprit here? You know what I mean? Ultimately, the murder charge for Dolores Mack was dropped. But Ellwood was found guilty of killing Cheryl Lewis. Because remember, Cheryl Lewis's friends, relatives, some 3 witnesses in total saw Cheryl with Russell Ellwood shortly before she was murdered. And then Russell Ellwood was found masturbating in the location where her body was found. So it's kind of, you know what I mean? I would also say that he's probably guilty at that point.
Definitely.
I mean, it's all circumstantial so far, but I assume law enforcement had something more, because doesn't seem like this is enough. But they probably had some more stuff on him. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole in 1999. However, a deputy who worked in the department later attempted to sue the department for allegedly firing him for revealing that Sue Rushing had destroyed crucial evidence, but his appeal was rejected due to lack of evidence. So this is so bonkers. At this point, it's like the task force was also corrupt, almost seeming like the task force just wanted to pin everything on Russell, which I do believe that, from the looks of it, Russell was the killer, but I feel like maybe they destroyed those receipts that would prove that he was in Ohio or something like that, because they knew that he could get away with the murder here. But it's still, you don't do that. You don't destroy evidence.
That's true.
But did they even destroy the evidence? It
sounds like they did.
It's weird.
Yeah.
Since Russell is Caucasian, he's white, he's not believed to have been involved in some of the murders. He died in Angola State Prison in Angola. Don't worry, Angola is still in Louisiana.
Okay, I thought it was the country.
No, he didn't go to Africa for that shit. Okay, and now between 1991 and 1995, 28 people, 23 women, 4 transgender women, and 1 individual of unknown gender were found strangled and suffocated in the New Orleans area. Many of the victims were sex workers and drug addicts. As of November of 2021, all of the murders aside from Cheryl Lewis remain unsolved because Ellwood was charged with her murder.
Yeah.
Ellwood remains a suspect in several of the killings, but no charges have been filed against him. He's dead. He died in 2014 in Angola. Victor Gantt had left New Orleans after his discharge from law enforcement and moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where he presumably still lives today. In a 2016 interview with the Huffington Post, law enforcement from the St. John Baptist Parish confirmed that Victor Gantt is still on the suspect list. Investigators also believe that another suspect in the murders may still be out there who has never been identified. And this is my research on the case of the New Orleans murder spree that happened from 91 to 95.
It was pretty wild down there.
It was insane.
Yep.
From the looks of things. And my thought is that both Russell Ellwood and Victor Gantt probably are involved.
Yeah, I'm pretty
That's
sure.
my theory, that both of them are involved. And I would say it's not completely out of the question that more people were involved. And I think maybe some of those corrupt cops could be responsible for some other murders.
Definitely.
Or something like that. But that's pretty much all I had for this case. Wanted to kind of look into it.
It's pretty odd how Victor Gantt is just walking around free.
Yeah, it's pretty bizarre. It's pretty bizarre.
When he completely looks like the sketch.
He completely looks like the sketch, I agree. He was born in 1962. At this point, he would be, let me do the quick math here. That would be 38 plus 23. That would be 61.
Oh,
He's
wow.
not even that old at this point. He's just 61. He's just 61. So still, I would say, more than capable. A former boxer, bodybuilder, 61-year-old Victor Gantt right now, somewhere out there in Atlanta, who
So-
legit killed people, is like just willy-nilly just
just walking around.
walking
Going to
around.
Walmart.
Yeah. Pretty strange, right?
Pretty strange because he also has drug charges.
I mean, in America, who doesn't have drug charges? So, I think, I mean, at this point, this is all I wanted to kind of bring up. And I guess we are very interested in your guys' feedback. We've had new subscribers, so we're very happy about that. More cases that I want to kind of look into are coming up as well. The ones that I found very interesting, and some kind of new news and everything about true crime, anything you want we can talk about, just leave a comment in the description. We will catch you on the next one, guys. Take care and peace out.